Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge, a spoiler-free chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel, The Deluge by Stephen Markley. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon, going into this last chapter recording as though we had too many IPAs the night before and a shot of Everclear in the parking lot.
That's emotionally how I feel about this episode, yes.
Yeah, caveat, emotionally. Today we are still discussing The Years of Rain and Thunder Part 5, set in 2039 and onward, but also in 2031, the fifth and final chapter from Matt's point of view, and the final chapter of the novel.
And more importantly, the final direct Deluge episode of this podcast.
Insane. How do we do this?
So we've foregone our usual structures, much like Kate, right? Hiking up Mount Whitney, no hiking poles anymore, jumping on boulders. That's us podcasting. I guess, the easy place to start is why what does ending this chapter or this novel with this particular Kate reminiscence do for the novel as a whole?
Well, it makes it a novel about Kate.
That's, I think, extremely. If that wasn't clear already, it's very clear.
Yeah. Like this novel, if this novel does not end with this last 6 pages vignette, this is maybe a novel about Kate, but not confidently a novel about Kate. And to end it this way renders it absolutely 100% unquestionably like Kate is the main character of the novel. This novel is about Kate.
Yes, and nothing tells that as much as we're going to kill our main character / protagonist / occasional antagonist, but then make her a central object in many different registers across the remaining chapters of other characters, some of whom barely or never met her.
Yeah, and every single character in some way or another, like explicitly, orthogonally, in some parallel sense. And like that her death, her death
isn't a death?
Yeah. She does not die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit funny considering the talk of legacy or the talk of what is the fight for and all of that kind of like, how are you going to be remembered? These are the questions that Matt as Markley Avatar has to Kate.
Yeah.
And then to ask those questions so pointedly as you close the novel in a way that makes her kind of immortal in a sense.
I made a list of the phrases, some of the phrases in this last 6 pages that could be that serve as like potential doublespeak for the like novel itself, Matt in the novel.
Let's hear him. Let's do it.
One is Kate saying on the ascent, we've always got one more in us.
Yep.
One is Matt saying, I didn't see any of the beauty at the time, struggling up the pass, reflecting on
that's a good one.
How pissed he is. One is who would protect her from herself, right? Matt reflecting on Kate. Kate obviously saying we're taking the long way home on this one, talking about climate change, right? And the efforts that they've made.
And that is a particular tell, given that's the name of book 5.
Yeah, 100%. Like Matt saying, have we been having separate conversations this whole time, right? Or saying, are we having separate conversations? And then implying, have we all always already been having separate conversations this whole time in the novel?
That's why you come to We Are the Deluge, to unite all of those conversations into one totally logical and
does Kate care about her legacy, right?
What do you think about that question? That's I think important for how we interpret this closing vignette.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation because that's the context in which Matt says they're having different conversations, actually, right? So, Kate says, right, Matt asks you, like, do you think about how you'll be remembered no matter what? You've already locked in a place for yourself in history, this is on 878, which is like kind of an interesting thing to say to your partner who you're like mad at during a hike. I think.
There's a lot of things that are funny about
question mark
telling your partner, well, they've gone ahead of you on this killer hike.
Oh, yeah. Also, that's I feel like doublespeak too. With each yard she put between us, I grew more irritated with her. Yeah. Right? I don't know. Question mark?
Yeah.
Okay, so she says, why would I? Nah, kid, we drink our drink, we sing our song, that's more than good enough. And then he's like, bullshit. I've never seen someone think more about her legacy than you. And then she's like pissed, like, no way, man, humans are just moss. Or not pissed, like she's like in a woo-woo, like
what she explicitly disavows elsewhere in the novel.
Right.
I'm thinking about the siege.
Yeah, which is really funny. And then she goes to Patti Smith, which I also love, right? When I heard her for the first time, I was like, oh my God, this bitch is the truth, right? Capital T truth. Yep. Art, science, philosophy, faith, all wrapped up in one gorgeous package. And that's just one of us. We're insanely singular and significant. And even our cruelty, our psychopathy, even that seems like a motherfucking miracle. And then Matt says, I feel like we're having separate conversations. Which, like...
it's good comedic timing.
Yeah. And I think he's not wrong.
I would agree.
Right. He's like pissed at her for prioritizing the movement over him in this moment. And
yes,
the movement is represented in like her ascent to the top of this peak seemingly without regard for his welfare, like his physical well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And for Matt, that's a metaphor for their relationship, for her commitment to the cause or whatever. And so he's like, you care more about how you're going to be remembered than you care about me, is what he's trying to say. And she's saying, none of us matters at the same time as we are all like unique and significant. So she's answering a completely different question, which
she's answering a ontological metaphysical question, not a relationship question. Although I think Kate also understands the way it's posed as a relationship question by Matt.
Right. But I think this is like at the core of their relationship tension. Like for her, it's always an ontological and metaphysical question. And for him, he's like, love me, please. Like, and they're always talking past each other on that bit. So this is either the ultimate kind of demonstration of that impasse that they're always up against, or like B, the concession that like the writer here is too tied up in his own emotional well-being to like take the ontological and metaphysical question as seriously as Kate wants it to be taken.
That last bit is really important. But before I get there, I think there's additionally the question to which what Kate says is accurate of her self-understanding and accurate of her mode of being in relation with others in the world. Because if we think about what she says, right, her utterances are thoroughly consistent with the world, with the cosmological view, not just worldview she articulates here.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, and I think this is a good thing, this is not to like criticize a contradiction or something, like just to say that people are contradictory, the amount of personal investment she had, say, in the siege, or the extremely personalistic politics that she gets caught up in / enters herself into or is constitutive of, even if she doesn't want that.
Yeah.
Somewhat belie the idea that it's not about legacy or not about herself or that it's about individuality rather than singularity. Right? Matt's always going to go individuality. Kate's always going to go singularity. And the question is like, when are the two of them able to switch into the others, consciously or not, willingly or not?
Yeah.
And what does that say about climate politics? And I have a theory there.
Ooh, is it time for theories or not yet?
Sure. I guess there's something about like Kate's reserve of energy that kicks off the chapter that like she had to throw up from the Everclear and the Hangover. And like she didn't eat anything except energy gummies all the way up. But at some point she like found this reserve of energy that no one else has. And that's when she starts taking off from Matt. That there's a question there about Kate's exceptionality as an individual in doing this feat that is, I think, also a question about her individuality as a political figure, and whether I think one of the things that Markley is querying with Kate is whether it takes a charismatic lightning rod figure to accomplish whatever Kate can be said to have accomplished, or Fierce Blue Fire can be said to have accomplished, or the siege can be said to have accomplished. Like, not in the sense that there is only one person who can do it, but in the Marx, we don't people make history, but only in the circumstances not of their own choosing.
Right.
Like, do the circumstances create the necessity plus some sense of psychic drive that people have, or something about individualism in American culture and political culture and ideology that requires that exceptional individual, singular in a different way figure in order to accomplish political goals. I think that Markley's interested in that with Kate.
Well, and I think that you posit a kind of essential like philosophical difference between them as like the frame or the posture of individualism versus, or individuality/ism question mark, depending on which one's more operative in Matt at any given moment.
Right.
And then like the singularity, which for Kate is, I think, like collective actually in a way.
Yes, I would agree.
Right. It's a kind of like collective possessiveness of singularity or singularity directed toward a kind of collective project. So
to be really obnoxious, it's like a kind of like, it's an assemblage.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
like singularity is assemblage rather than as individual.
So that's fascinating too for what it means about like how we actually consider that singular charismatic force. Because if we think about it as like as in or forming or at like a nexus of some kind of critical assemblage for marshaling some sort of like substantive response to climate change, then it's less about like finding our savior and more about like readying ourselves for like that confluence or which I think is why the keeper chapters in the religious like valence stuff is actually like, maybe that's one reason why that's here, because
so that Kate's counterpart is not Shane, but is the pastor.
Yeah. And like and I think this is true in the context of the US, right? Like there is a way to which we have already readied ourselves for the pastor, like not you and I specifically, but like as a nation, quote unquote, with all the problematics of invoking that, implied. But like, so if we can ready ourselves for the pastor, why not for Kate Morris, Yeah. One other thought on your theory. So what's really interesting about that too is the context of Kate's reserve energy is that she sweats out her hangover. So I wonder what that implies about how that
what
functions.
Must we expunge?
Or as a diagnosis of where we are, right? Like the problem is that we're like too hungover and we haven't powered through. We haven't sweated out. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what sort of like stasis or hesitation or pause or like way to characterize the current moment that is specifically captured in the kind of physiology of a hangover. But it strikes me as not an accidental way to set up this like metaphor for her reserve energy, right?
Yes. And that's the kind of moving between the individual and the collective that maybe is a lesson of Kate Morris, to put it very tritely. Because there's something about the form of the novel, not like the Deluge, but the novel, that is so capital individual.
T, capital N.
You got a lot of discussion of that coming up. Be warned, listener. That it in Always Already is going to individualize. Witness that Kate is the main character, even though she never doesn't have a point of view or interiority in the way that all these other characters do. Witness the way that she persists long after her death. So there's something that structurally the novel can't not make Kate an individual, but simultaneously the novel is struggling to examine the extent to which an individual can be part of a collective assemblage singularity. Because
so is the fact that she never gets a POV that effort?
Yes, I think
rendering her singular rather than individual.
Absolutely. I had never thought of it that directly, but I think that's precisely it.
Interesting. So she cannot assume a POV actually if she is to be individual plus or not /individual or something
because
in excess of or individual. Yeah.
Because we're introduced to her where she's like, I'm sick of AOC and Greta, Yeah. And the celebritization of politics. And then she becomes one of the primary, if not the primary political celebrity, despite her professed efforts not to.
Right. But it's interesting that in her death, the function of her celebrity is to assemble collectives.
She's fucking Yoda, you know?
Yeah. Damn. That's really funny because do you remember that we talked about Star Wars in the very first Tony chapter?
Nope. Yep. Harrison Ford. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Force Ghost Kate, you know?
Yeah. Eternal Return and so on. Okay. I have a couple other little like questions of in-text things from this chapter.
Yeah.
Should we do that now?
Let's do that.
Okay, first, I just want to make fun of Matt, maybe Markley here. No one who lives anywhere near or spends any time in the Sierra Nevadas would ever call them the Sierra Mountains. 874. You just say the Sierras, or you give it its full name. You say the Sierra Nevadas. No one says mountains afterwards.
Yep, this is good. This is
okay. Yeah. So is this like Markley making fun of Matt, or is this actually Markley being from Ohio and like not...
Are those different things is my rejoinder.
Right. Yes. And that's the third question or the third possibility. But I just thought it was very funny. I was like, no one would ever say that. Like people who are super local, who like live in the mountains would just say the Sierras, or they would say like the backcountry or give a specific like peak. I mean, they're hiking out Whitney, right? Which is like one of the most famous peaks. But like when you're talking about the range, you don't say mountains at the end.
Yeah.
It's so funny to me. I love it so much. Okay. What was the other one I wanted to think about? Oh, what do you make of this phrase? This is on 878 again. Mimetic warfare.
I was going to ask you the same question.
That's amazing. And also not surprising. I
mean, that is, in a Plato sense, what the book is doing.
Say more.
In the sense that, like, mimesis is the thing that Plato understands to be a threat to the cohesiveness of the morality, philosophy, and psychology of the collective.
Okay, that's good. My thought was, is mimetic warfare a way to characterize like actually the tactics or like the arsenal of tools of like capital C, capital F climate fiction?
Yes, those are the same question.
Those are the same, right?
Yeah,
that's what Plato's saying. Yeah.
Uh-huh. I mean, I think that's I somehow had yet to like frame the question that is directly either. So that's incredibly useful in terms of, you know, so let's make that whole, you know, part about climate fiction in general. This is not just about our planet's fate right now. It's about the next battle and the battle after that. It's about our destiny as a species. We're holding on to something unthinkable, something holy, and we may lose it before we even realize it's in our hands. You know, something unthinkable or holy could also be used to describe the form of the novel in like the political economy and technological hellscape and fascism of our own time. That no one is going to be converted into a climate justice warrior by this book, but it's about like the one reader after another. Yeah.
One battle after another.
Exactly.
Okay. Next one is on 879. Kate skipping backward in this unchoreographed vagabond dance.
Okay. This one threw me for a loop. Well, only that it's in some ways the perfect encapsulation of Matt trying to deal for 900 almost pages of Kate's singularity and inspirational nature and visionary status on the one hand, with how she's borderline cruel and makes people, Matt most of all, feel very small. That there's something that, like, whether that actually happened or not, or whether that's a great line that writer Matt Stanton thought of, doesn't matter, because both of those encompass the wholeness of the miracle, the motherfucking miracle that is Kate Morris. Okay, this just occurred to me right this second. I'm wondering whether there's not something that either Matt or Markley is sort of like cynically tapping into, which speaks to this sort of like
the option or postures of individualism / ality versus singularity. But this idea that like maybe something about the American dream or the myth of the American nation is we all fancy ourselves kind of like unchoreographed vagabond dancers, like charting our own paths and like sort of uniquely in charge of our own fates, even at the same time as we, like, whether consciously or unconsciously, feel our lives as like totally circumscribed by the conditions in which we live, and we accept everything that we've been given as inevitable and thus unchangeable. And like this is the like central hubristic kind of paradox that like makes us unwilling to like fundamentally change our lives in any meaningful way, especially when it comes to questions of climate change, which is like a temporality question. Like, are my efforts worth it? Am I going to personally see any return on my investment? Or like, what can one person?
It's
what's my return on investment for having spent a year and a half close reading this novel?
Don't ask that question. That question is banned.
banned. But also like so it's the temporal question, but it's also the like, what can one individual possibly do question. It's the threshold, like tipping point question. It's the climate science question. You know what I mean? Like, if we pull 1%, of something, isn't that good enough, or doesn't that matter?
Which is Kate's theory of a theory of change just a bit above, right? Mm-hmm. One of the last things she says before she starts her vagabond dance, we're definitely taking the long way home on this one. Even if we succeed, it'll be generations before the emergency ends. I think we have to be at peace with that. It's that old saw. You strike your match and it gets blown out. So you strike the next one and that gets blown out too. And again, you keep lighting matches and they keep getting blown out. But you got to keep lighting them, right? Because you just don't know which one is going to ignite the blaze.
Yeah, right. So that's where Kate and Matt are like intentionally doing doublespeak, I think, right? And then Matt says, what if we run out of matches, right? Which is really funny given not funny, but darkly funny given what we just witnessed him go through in the hurricane, right? Mm-hmm. And his kind of confronting his own failure to plan, or his own like incompetence, right? Like as a man in an emergency situation, right? Like his father has to teach him like how to care, how to be a father,
Right.
Okay. 2 more little things in this little passage. 1, what do you make of the fact that Kate's last line of dialogue in this book is, no matter how cute you look in your little hiking shorts tonight, not like ignite the blaze or whatever, or can't take life too seriously.
That no matter how much of a singularity force gathering point nexus you're also always just like an individual who wants to fuck some other individuals.
Great.
Right, which is like I mean that
hedonism,
is that because that's also Kate Morris.
Yeah, totally. I like that. Okay, now
and we'll make that playful and bantery and like part of a dynamic of relationship building.
Yeah, right. Like
various kinds and lengths and temporalities.
If we're not having sex during the revolution, we don't want to play.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, and then on 880, Matt says that each and every one of us carried this thing she had, a dormant seed of the wild within. What the fuck is he saying there? What is the dormant seed of the wild within, and why does Matt think that we all have this? Or does he really?
I mean, I think that's like a line that sounded good to Matt and or Markley. But to take the question more seriously, I think there's something about and I mean this in a very cliche way, not at all in a technical way, like the existential nature of this novel and of Kate's philosophy of life and climate politics as it's laid out here and throughout the entire novel. That's like, well, don't all of us have the things that seem like lost causes, but these might be the smallest, most interpersonal scales or like smallest life obstacle or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there's all this shit that some of us encounter in the day, no matter how immovable or intractable it seems, don't we try to keep going in the face of it, or try to, change it so that 17 matches down the line it changes? That's the like very cliche, trite, optimistic reading of that, which I think is the place that Matt takes it, which we will get to.
But I'm also really interested in specifically the invoking of the wild, because we saw that throughout
Americana shit, right?
Book 5, right? Like Kate is alive and wild, and it's like on these billboards in the Midwest where every single aspect of infrastructure, both physical and institutional, has crumbled, right?
And also is in Europe, like that was in Norway when they overthrew Breivik.
Yeah, and like in the path of destruction, rent by the hurricane. And so like I'm wondering what is being invoked there specifically. Is it like, is there a subtle, I don't know, like critique of technocratic, right, like solutions to climate change, and like an embrace of the wild as something that like is a kind of interspecies ecological posture? Or
don't read it that way, I don't think. Yeah.
It's interesting.
And maybe it's a little bit because, I've read The Trouble with Wilderness too many times.
Right.
Or whatever. But I think of it in a very political sense as wildness is refusal to accept that the political institutions and forms and political economies that are in front of us are the only ones that might be. Like I think about it as like it's an argument that there is a subjectivity that is able to be politicized or radicalized within that lays dormant within all of us, or something like that.
Okay, I like that.
But like, I don't know. I'll say that the last paragraph just baffles me every single time of this novel, because even if we take the last sentence, I could believe we would free ourselves of these mournful histories, that all our tears and sorrow would be given back to us. And when we walked these ruins now, we would begin again and carry across impossible time the glory of this ancient and magnificent world. Like, that's the tritest shit I've ever heard. And we know that's intentional because Markley is capable of very much the opposite of trite.
Yeah, I think that sentence is the biggest piece of textual evidence for the conspiracy theory that Matt's whole novel was written by the AI.
You're right. It is giving a little LLM.
Well, it's carry across impossible time the glory of this ancient and magnificent world. Like, what those words in that order don't mean the thing I think that you mean. Like, what's that phrase? Like, that word that doesn't mean the thing you think it means, or whatever. Yeah. Like, I feel like this is an example of that.
Yeah, I guess the question that I have to ask myself is what makes this different than the end to Tony's first chapter or final chapter? What makes it different from Quentin's self-immolation at the end of The Siege? What makes it different than like the fires that are like lapping at Keeper's heels? Like all the other times when Markley enters this register, this one rings more hollow to me than any of those. And I can't exactly pinpoint why. Yeah,
like I don't feel moved here in the way that I felt moved in all those other instances. Maybe I'm just thinking about this now for the first time, but maybe there's something that rings a bit disingenuous about Matt as a character compared to Tony or Keeper that has to do with a kind of like liberal optimism, maybe? Like
optimism is, I think, one of the questions. Yes.
But like what type of optimism? Because I think like for Tony and Keeper, for sure, there's no like, do you have Laurent Berlant right there?
Yes.
Incredible.
Ready to go.
So good. But that Matt has always at every turn seemed to think that like this is all a nightmare and at some point things will be fine, which I think for Matt implies, even as he's coming to political consciousness, a like mythical return to a time when things were fine before.
So it's like the claim to or hope for innocence, or innocent times.
Yes.
Amidst the impossible time. Like that's Like the impossible time is the innocent time, but it's impossible for a different reason than Matt thinks it's an impossible time.
Right. And like Tony does not yearn. The only thing Tony yearns for is a time when Gail is still alive. Right. Yes. But like he is
in
not,
a certain kind of like world or life for his kids.
Right. But like he's not deluded that time was like, if we could just go back to this perfect time in the past, you know, and maybe that's because his kids are biracial. Maybe that's because he's like a scientist, a capital S scientist.
Yeah.
You know, like Ash certainly does not have that romantic notion. Keeper, there's not like every potentially optimistic or even forward-looking at all moment, like any moment where Keeper dares to think that he might have a future at all is like pulled out from under him in like really horrible ways. And he is not at all deluded that there was a time like in his life or a mythical time where who he is and like how he came to be would be like safe or free or like a better person or something like that, you know? Mm-hmm. And like Matt yearns for all of those things in a way that like, that sort of seems to imply that he thinks, you know, if it was just a different time or place, he could have had those things, right?
Or if it was a different time or place, then he and Kate could have had
what
a
he has with
relationship that sustained.
Yeah. The house, the kids, no hurricane, Kate, right?
Yeah. Kate, parentheses, non-hurricane.
Yeah. So then why make him the author?
So this is brings me to one of the passages that we haven't discussed yet that I did want to ask you about. This is at the bottom of 877. This is Matt's self-narration. It occurred to me that maybe I was the selfish one. After the failure of Prira, after the embarrassment of her scandal, after the awful stay with her dad, this hike had been the first time I'd seen Kate truly joyful in months. 2 miles down from Whitney's Peak, I finally felt guilty about denying her this moment of vitality and grace, a brief respite just to taste her own sweat and the punch of adrenaline. And there's something about that wondering about who's the selfish one here that could be extended beyond Matt and Kate here. Like, I think it's important that Matt ask that of himself. I think if you are as conscious of your relationship to the tradition of the great American novel, as I believe we both think Markley is, and also attendant to questions of identity and what that means for epistemology and creativity and expression and generation of ideas, then is it selfish to write an 880-page
novel
epic? But then there's also the question about what are the ways in which we are all the selfish ones as we live in like the Cthulhu scene or Plantationist scene or Anthropocene or whatever we want to call it, right? As we consume under fascism, as we ponder our ROIs of our climate fiction podcasting over other ways we could have spent this time, like that question of, well, maybe I was the selfish one is, I think, a question that Matt as the character in this novel, but then also Matt as an avatar for Markley is uniquely situated to pose.
Yeah. Okay. This is maybe splitting hairs, but that made me think about what actually is the way to think about or characterize the relationship between Matt and Markley. Like, is Matt the avatar for Markley or like a proxy for Markley, or is he like a vehicle for Markley to interrogate his own work? And is there a difference between those two things? Like, are we supposed to think that Matt's reckoning with like his aspirations to write the novel is the same reckoning that Markley would do or we should expect him to do? Or is this a way for Markley to just like, again, kind of flex some chops? Like, this is what a great work of climate fiction should do, is to raise the questions of the author and to raise the questions of selfishness, that raise the questions of what we owe each other through our arts or our, pursuits that all ultimately entwine us in this great drama of like how to live in these times of crisis or something like that. And like, I realize that's a really, really subtle distinction. And like, maybe you think those aren't different at all, but it strikes me that like,
well, I mean, it depends how much psychoanalysis of an author we want to do.
Oh, yeah.
Like, do we want to like do a Hannah Pitkin about Machiavelli? Here's 3 chapters of psychoanalysis of Machiavelli. Because I think that whether intentional or conscious or not, the sense that this is something that must be done in order to be a great climate novel that is not just like onanistic is, I suspect in there somewhere at a to be determined or ambiguous level of awareness or consciousness. But then, I wonder to the extent to which Matt is a way in which the virtual becomes actual, like that is a parallel or alternate like universe, right, of Stephen Markley.
Okay, I like that. So literal, like an avatar in the sense of the avatar novel. That's the real answer. Okay, you know what?
That ties it up pretty neatly, I think.
Yeah. Well, as this novel is wont to do, though. So
we'll get to that as well.
Okay, one more thing about this chapter. I know we had like 3 big things we're going to get to, and it's already almost 40. But
don't worry.
What do you make of
my game? We're going to play is going to take a while, so
okay, this is my last one then.
Yeah.
What do you make of Kate's like argument, theory, philosophy of mountains, and why does Matt put them in italics instead of in quotation marks? This is the only like thing that Kate says in this chapter that is not in quotation. So it's on 877. I mean, and I know she said it in the past, but like she's often put things that she said in the past into the text as though we can like hear her say them, which I think is something I realized that quotation marks do for me, is like it puts that in the voice of the person who's saying it rather than the voice of the narrator recalling what was said.
I think that's part of it. I think it's also just a temporality thing, right? Because this is something Kate had said long ago.
Yeah.
So maybe so as to like not...
But he takes us there a little bit, right? We've been staring at the geology of Idaho while coming down the backside of the Teton Range. Mountains are the planet's best violence.
Yeah.
Mountains are chaos disguised as stillness.
Those are the things she said in the past in Idaho, right? Or looking down on Idaho.
Yeah.
And then everything that's in quotation marks is in 2031. Like maybe I'm trying to oversimplify it, but...
Yeah. But I see, so I'm just saying like literally when I read this paragraph, I hear those in Matt's voice, not Kate's. And I hear Kate in real time saying, see, I told you, Tar Heel, but he could have put that in Kate's voice. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And like we could have heard Kate saying that instead of him saying that. Well,
this furthers my idea that the planet's best violence should be the episode title for this episode.
Great. Sold.
if it's Matley, I was just about to say Matley.
That's incredible.
Which is terrifying to me.
Okay, now we have to do an episode where we psychoanalyze the podcast. The podcast that never ends.
We are the deluge is eternal. Much like we will traverse the impossibility of we will carry across impossible time with this podcast.
Yeah, the glory of this ancient and magnificent podcast.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move from just this closing to?
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing this as a whole, but I guess the theory I'll proffer, and I made a note to myself to do this last week, and I was like, oh, well, I'll do some Lauren Berlant. And I was like, no, then I'll save it for for this episode.
Yeah.
And then I realized we weren't actually doing theory, so I'm going to make us do some theory anyway.
Great.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have Lauren Berlant's infamous cruel optimism is Emily clocked by me like sliding it across the desk for like a half a second.
Wait a minute.
I've seen that cover before.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you whether this novel, the extent to which this novel engages in cruel optimism vis-a-vis climate action as diagnosing the forms of cruel optimism that lead us to continue to muddle ourselves into catastrophe.
Wait.
So is the novel participating in cruel optimism, or is it pushing against cruel optimism?
Okay.
So
John?
I'm going to read chapter from page 24 of Cruel Optimism. I describe cruel optimism as a relation of attachment to compromised conditions of possibility whose realization is discovered either to be impossible, sheer fantasy, or too possible and toxic. What's cruel about these attachments, and not merely inconvenient or tragic, is that the subjects who have X in their lives might well not endure the loss of their object or scene of desire, even though its presence threatens their well-being, because whatever the content of the attachment is, the continuity of its form provides something of the continuity of the subject's sense of what it means to keep on living and to look forward to being in the world.
Okay. Well,
because I think this is a hopeful novel or optimistic novel.
Yeah.
So it's a question of what kind of optimism.
But it's paradoxical because it's so traumatizing.
Which is why I think it's challenging rather than to show my cards. Like, I think it's more challenging than it is participating in cruel optimism, despite the things that wrap up quasi-neatly at the end.
But I think the answer is that it's both.
Obviously. So it's always the answer.
Okay, yeah. But I think the fact that it's both raises the question of whether, to diagnose cruel optimism is sort of always already a form of cruel optimism itself, which I don't think that Lauren Berlant would be in just full disagreement with.
I do not think they would reject that out of hand, no. But
which is a fascinating premise or suggestion, because it means in some ways and this gets at, I think, an undergraduate frustration with critical theory that only criticizes and does not prescribe an alternative, but that there's something about the attempt to offer a critique of the present that implies a dramatically different way of doing things, or the possibility of a dramatically different way of doing things that is always optimistic at root, even if it is absolutely fundamentally about the appearance of the impossibility. Because one of the things—
Are we talking about the deluge or parable of the sower at this point?
Oh. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But And this is the anarchist thing, right? The prefigurative politics, build the thing in the ruins of the whatever. But I think for the question of how to shine, how do we frame the limits of that kind of project without dismissing it so that we find ourselves kind of unconsciously or consciously conceding the terms of the present.
Yeah.
Right? That seems the most difficult part of a radical revolutionary project, whether you're trying to philosophically flesh out what values we want to jettison, right? What values are not serving us, what values are actually causing harm, or whether you're talking about strategy, right? Where do we want to direct our daily efforts? That in both cases, to say we ought not to be optimistic, or not that we ought not to be optimistic, but that we ought to be cautious about an optimism that accepts the impossibility, or accepts the now or something.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about, I'm sure I mentioned this on this podcast before. There's this really, really wonderful article by Diana Stewart about Extinction Rebellion.
Yes, yeah.
That I think addresses precisely this sort of question. And I would situate the Deluge as doing some of what she identified, say what one will about Extinction Rebellion. I'm more interested in the kind of structure of feeling that Stewart is examining within Extinction Rebellion. And that is that it is a paradoxical or radical hope that is hope for what is left, or hope out of despair, like after despair there is hope, or hope that doesn't assume that there is going to be a solution, or hope that doesn't assume that things will turn out well, that all of those have to be like worked through in a like almost psychoanalytic sense in order to arise. That's not what Stuart's doing. I'm adding that on top of it, but like to arrive at this much more paradoxical or radical form of hope. And there's something about the way that Markley kind of so matter-of-factly articulates, well, here's the political, like in Ash chapters, here's the political problem, and here's what you do to fix it, and here's why it might fail anyway. That...
Well, and might fail in two senses, right? It might fail politically. And then, like, even if you can achieve it politically, it might still fail.
What I've noticed has been, because, I did some like degrowth stuff in my EPT class this semester. And like, I was struck by how much of the, when you put somebody who is like a degrowth person and not a degrowth person in a debate or like conversation in some form, like they're much more interested in the politics, like the on the ground politics of it in a lot of ways than in the bigger disagreements between them. Like there's this really great debate. I forget who the two people are, but it's moderated by Kate Rayworth, who's very interesting and like does the donut economics thing in her own right. And she's like moderating this debate at, some school in the UK. And it gets into essentially like, is even if degrowth was better, would its political diagnosis and prescriptions doom it to fail even in the realization of its goals if we could fully agree on the goal? Its goals were desirable.
That's so funny. I feel like what I noticed when I was teaching those debates is that to me, degrowth actually seems just in rote like realism more possible than like a techno fix that relies on growth. Like it just seems way more realistic that we could like.
But again, here we go. Realistic in what sense, right? Is the
well, I know, but that's like I just keep being forced to think in that framework, even though I don't like it, because my students like will not let that go. They like only want to agree with things that seem realistic to them, and they don't want to interrogate like the different registers in which something could be realistic, the things that they have foreclosed from even possibility by assuming that they are unchangeable, right? And like they don't have a historical long view on that kind of stuff. So, but I'm like,
and so like I like set up degrowth with like what is the value of realistic utopian thinking,
right?
And like even to try to cue that, and it didn't quite work.
But I'm just like, fine, force me to talk realistically. I still think degrowth is fucking realistic as hell. Like it's so much easier, I think, logistically to be like, stop producing things because we have too many already, and then figure out how to get the people who don't have the things that exist what they need. And like the immediacy of the impact of that, right, is like a no-brainer to me. And in fact, like we know that it works because COVID, right? And like that was obviously an emergency situation, but like, how is this not an emergency situation?
Is book 5 of the Deluge a story examining degrowth?
Ooh. Yeah. Or also, what it occurs to me, it's a story made possible by COVID, where like what we learned in COVID can be extended or transposed into like a scenario where the emergency is not a medical emergency, but is a climatological emergency.
Now we're doing Ross Mega.
Yeah. Yeah. What other theorists have we not talked about that we can just bubble in all of this last 6-page discussion? Yeah. I remember too that I wanted to talk about Michel Serres at some point and forgot to do that.
Yeah.
I
don't know where that would have gone. I don't know if Matt.
I didn't prep anything. I don't think it works for Matt either. I think we needed to do that in like
book 2.
Yeah. Oh, well, I guess we'll have to do
we'll have to do it again.
Yeah. Oh my God. What if in like 3 years we redid this podcast?
But like we like went back and identified who our theorists were, and we couldn't use any of them or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Can't use any of the talking points we used before.
we are banned. We have to make a list of everyone we discussed, and other than that, we are banned from returning to our previous notes. Well, so I talked about this with my class on our last day, like whether I should swap this out for something the next time I teach the climate fiction, climate film class. And I'd probably do ministry for the future, which is relevant as well for our purposes.
What did they say?
They were like, it's actually kind of worth it to read this really long novel. And I was like, okay, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah.
Even the students who didn't love it were like, I recognized what this was doing. So, good for them.
I sort of like don't really care if students don't want to read a novel anymore.
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's like, it's really about reading one novel or another. Yeah. And I have found that even when they don't like the specific novel, I think my experiences aligns with yours, that they're like grateful to have done it, or they feel challenged to have done it, which is sad because it means they're not like reading novels on their own, or in other classes, but whatever. Yeah, no, I appreciate that challenge. No, the only unanimous opinion in that class was no more Taming the Garden.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That is a documentary that I love, and I tell them that's actually precisely the one thing that will stay every time I teach this class.
Wow. Why don't they like it?
Because it's really, I think, purposefully alienating.
Yeah.
To the viewer, and refuses to engage any of the documentary conventions.
Yeah. Aha. That's interesting that you like it so much.
Yeah, I know. And I told them I think it's really good to engage in art that is alienating you and asking you and to ask why. And I was like, that's why I know that's not a popular movie, but that's why I will show it.
Yeah.
Every time.
I love that.
Do we want to get to this bit extended framing device that I've prepared for us?
Yes, I'm nervous, but let's do it.
Okay. So what I've done is yesterday I reread most of The Great Derangement by Amitav Ghosh. And what I have prepared for us is I identified 8 things that Ghosh says makes writing climate fiction near impossible. Okay. And I want to, as quickly as I can, run through them and ask you whether you think Markley overcomes each of these challenges.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to get a pen.
Okay, so let me quote from very early on in part 1 of The Great Derangement and kind of run through my pitch, and then we'll go through the challenges. So here's Ghosh, section 4 in part 1. I would go further now that the Anthropocene presents a challenge not only to the arts and humanities, but also to our common sense understandings and beyond that to contemporary culture in general. This, to identify how this happens is, I think, a task of the utmost urgency. It may well be that the key to understanding why contemporary culture finds it so hard to deal with climate change, indeed, is perhaps the most important question ever to confront culture in the broadest sense. For let us make no mistake, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of the imagination. So that's the kind of fundamental, I think, argument of the first part of Great Derangement.
This is so funny. That's how I opened my climate futures class.
Yeah, that's how I closed it yesterday.
Incredible.
So this is terrifying in a certain way. Okay, so we're going to run through. Caveat that I'm being exceptionally reductionist and instrumental, and Ghosh is an incredible thinker and writer. Great. And it's such a wonderful read. Let me reduce it. And also I want to point out that Dipesh Chakrabarty's The Climate of History is Ghosh's framing for a lot of this. Okay, so first challenge is about probability and the novel, and about the logics of probability and the way that they do or don't work in various novels, and particularly in quote unquote kind of serious literary fiction. So here's kind of the key passage from Ghosh, and then Emily, you can see a bunch more. This then is the first of many ways in which the age of global warming defies both the literary fiction and contemporary common sense. The weather events of this time have a very high degree of improbability. It is certain in any case that these are not ordinary times. The events that mark them are not easily accommodated in the deliberately prosaic world of serious prose fiction. So do you think that the Deluge is able to like engage with the improbable but being made more probable despite our conventions of probability in the novel that Ghosh diagnoses.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really taps into a set of pairs we've been kind of identifying throughout the novel: the spectacular and the mundane,
Hell yeah,
the intimate and the structural, the slow violence and of like economic collapse, of the war on terror, and all both as tied up in the slow violence of climate change, and the drama, right? The cinematicness, right, of the extreme weather events, but also I think the depiction, the prosaic, haunting depiction of the violence. So there's like the action and the pace of the weather events in this novel that's paired with the like disgusting, right? Like evocative descriptions of the aftermath that I think are very effective, right? It is both prosaic and like logical, or like ill/logical, if I may invoke an academic trope for critical theory kind of neologism trope there.
Yeah, I think I've a little bit fallen prey to what Ghosh has identified here in some of my like questioning about, are these coincidences or ways that things wrap up, or the improbability that like Shane was Lucy and all of these things. Like, I think I have symptomatically expressed precisely the logic of reality and concealment in the way that Ghosh talks about it throughout my engagement with particularly book 5 of this novel, which to me tells me that the novel is working on a different logic of probability than the more conventional one I bring to it. Because like Ghosh talks about how, okay, if you have a character meet a character who's like a long lost friend in the middle of the street, like you have to do something to make that seem quote unquote earned. And I've used that specific language to talk about some of the stuff that happens in book 5 of the Deluge.
Okay, but is there, so help me work this out. So is it that like when like plot devices that tie up individual characters' lives, when those feel improbable, that is like priming us for accepting
the improbability of the firestorm in LA, of Hurricane Kate, of
so we're supposed to be frustrated by like how neat everything is tied up, because it's so unlikely that all of those things would have been true.
I think the generous reparative reading is yes.
Well, that's our favorite kind. So
it is. All right. You ready for challenge number 2?
Yes.
Okay. So this is about what Ghosh calls the environmental uncanny, right? And so he identifies that while literature is very much able to engage the uncanny in terms of the supernatural, it's unable to do so with regards to what he calls non-human forces and beings. And so this is tied up in like questions of who and what is an agent, right? So what Ghosh says, this is in section 8 in part 1, all of this makes climate change events peculiarly resistant to the customary frames the literature has applied to nature. They are too powerful, too grotesque, too dangerous, and too accusatory to be written about in a lyrical or elegiac or romantic vein. We are confronted suddenly with a new task, that of finding other ways in which to imagine the unthinkable beings and events of this era. Does Markley find other ways to imagine the unthinkable beings and events of this era? Emily Kendall.
Yes.
This one's an easy yes, I think.
Yes, but I think in more ways than just the obvious way.
What's the obvious way? I wonder if we're thinking of the same obvious way.
The obvious way is that like the fire is a character, the weather is a character.
Okay, I was going to go somewhere different. So yes, this is good.
Right? Yeah. Hurricane Kate is literally Kate. Like Kate rendered supernatural, but both supernatural and non-human natural actor, like kind of all at the same time, right?
Yeah.
That is that thing, the uncanny, right? That like not only does Kate never die, but Kate is also the hurricane and
alive and wild and the global collective rising up.
And like the seed in all of us.
Oh yes, the seed of the wild. Who can forget?
But I think that also the way the religious questions are figured in the novel and the kind of like specter of faith versus reason, or like our inability to, or like our struggle to try to find something to make sense of the things that we can't make sense of.
Yeah.
That there's a little bit of the uncanny there too. Like that there's the recurring phenomena of dreams here that are not, which I actually like, we did tons of very like psychoanalytic intentional reading of the dreams, but you could get away with reading this novel without doing that and being like, for a novel that's about climate science, there's a fuck ton of like random dreams in here, you know?
100%.
And like, it's like the unconscious is maybe like an uncanny non-human actor in the novel or something like that.
I mean, and Ghosh sets this up by being like, well, for Freud, the uncanny means this, and I mean something a little bit different. But you're positing, like, what if actually we bring those two together?
Yeah, and I think Markley does that, whether consciously or unconsciously.
Well,
if I may.
I'll get there, too. I mean, I think for me, the place where this happens the most is actually to use the word that Ghosh uses, like the elegiac cosmological scale of the writing that like closes, 3/4 of these chapters. Yeah. And then in all of those places, all of the characters are always reaching for the epic that has some uncanniness to it, or uncanniness about the human's relationship to that which is non-human, which might be the weather, or it might be planet Earth, or it might be the cosmos, or it might be heaven or hell. Like all of those things are like the measuring stick of the uncanniness, and the attempt to try to reach them are the characters via Markley trying to express the ineffability of the uncanny.
Right, which is interesting in that reading because then they're both agents and objects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Into that.
Okay, next challenge. This is in section 11 of part 1 of Great Derangement, and it's where colonial geographies meet habitus, is what I've called it. So what Ghosh does is kind of walk through this really incredible historical work about how colonizing powers site their major cities on the ocean for a bunch of colonial reasons, economic reasons, political reasons, and do so despite there being local knowledge about, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this. Yeah. And like his examples are New York City, Mumbai, Kolkata, Hong Kong, right? So we have been warned, we've been told about the risks, yet like colonialism settles land and appropriates land, megacities grow, and they create what he calls habitual motion. And so he identifies like that is the kind of colonial geography part. And then he thinks about, on both an individual and collective level, what he calls people being, quote, ruled by the inertia of habitual motion. This is indeed the condition of the vast majority of human beings, which is why very few of us will be able to adapt to global warming if it is left to us as individuals to make the necessary changes. Those who will uproot themselves and make the right preparations are precisely those obsessed monomaniacs who appear to be on the borderlines of lunacy. And then he's like, well, it could be the governments. Like, that's what they could be doing. Then he says, yet to look around the world today is to recognize that with some notable exceptions, there exist very few polities or public institutions that are capable of even implementing or even contemplating a managed retreat from vulnerable locations.
Okay. Frame your question here.
So the question is, does Markley depict and or give us affective, epistemological, creative tools to abandon our habitual motions vis-a-vis the colonial geography that creates vulnerabilities to climate?
Okay, this is, I think, a fascinating question in the context of this novel, and Markley as a writer who I think his sense of the like American condition qua like illness or whatever is fundamentally set in the Midwest, right? Because the bill has this ambitious plan to retreat from the coast, right? To render the coastline national park. But like, if you think about the colonial geography of the US, the Midwest is a site that is like incredibly rich and like storied with the colonial history, right? Like the Midwest is the place that like, you know, the borderlands, right? The liminal space between the frontier, manifest destiny, the ultimate realization of the like the myth of the American nation. And it's also like where Indigenous people were displaced to, right? From not the regions that are now so vulnerable, although some of them, but the regions just next to the regions that are most vulnerable. So like so the Midwest is the kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like the offloading site, right? Of that local knowledge, those local epistemologies.
Which it literally was for like Thomas Jefferson.
Totally. And so the siphoning off of like local Indigenous knowledges from the development, right, of the capitalist project, of the nationalist project, of the racialized project, and so on. But that also the Midwest is like a site of extreme weather that is vulnerable in a different way. Also a site of extreme economic precarity that is vulnerable in a different way from the coast, right? That like Jackie is the one, right?
And Keeper,
and Keeper are the ones who are like inundated with flooding.
Literally inundated,
Yeah. And like and you know, I don't know how intentionally Markley is thinking in the colonial register. We get at least, I think, a suggestion or a little piece of evidence that he's at least thinking about it in The Siege. But it certainly doesn't form like the center of the ecological ethos, right? It's like relevant to Kate, and I think Kate is drawing on that model in the Fierce Blue Fire kind of like
I mean that
grassroots organizing.
Keeper and Raquel open their go to a Fierce Blue Fire community in Ohio.
Right. So there's something about the ever presentness of those who were here before at the same time as they're not central to the plot. That's like very fascinating, whether again, it's conscious or unconscious, is I think really interesting. But I think Markley is very much interested in like the changing of habit in that sense, and like the promise or the impossibility or the potentiality for like what that looks like, right? And like whether that's again a tipping point question or like a grassroots collective like prefigurative politics question, which I think are two slightly different questions.
I would agree. I think for me it's Matt and it's Jackie and it's Keeper as the people who don't start the novel thinking about climate change that most illustrate like what it means to change your habitus. And that's paired with one of the fundamental policy solutions that they come to, a managed retreat from vulnerable locations, i.e. the coasts and the like line of moving back, 9 feet or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I think that there's on that aspect, but then I think you're right to point out the like bigger question. And also like the nation's capital becomes Cleveland, Ohio.
Right.
That's part of this as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Next challenge is whether Markley overcomes the challenge of the way that setting and discontinuity function within the novel, right? So here it's useful to point out that Ghosh is contrasting novels with epics. And this perhaps tells us something about the Deluge as a climate epic. A better phrase than the climate novel is a question, of course. So, he talks about the setting or a, quote, sense of place is, quote, famously one of the great conjurations of the novel as a form, but that implies a great amount of limiting and like the establishing of borders of place, but then also he adds of time as like the condition of possibility for narration within the novel. And so the question, the challenge then for writing The Climate is, quote, novels, on the other hand, conjure up worlds that become real precisely because of their finitude and distinctiveness. Within the mansion of serious fiction, no one will speak of how the continents were created, nor will they refer to the passage of thousands of years. Connections and events on this scale appear not just unlikely, but also absurd within the delimited horizon of a novel. But the Earth of the Anthropocene is precisely a world of insistent, inescapable continuities, animated by forces that are nothing if not inconceivably vast. Here, then, is another form of resistance, a scalar one that the Anthropocene presents to techniques that are most closely identified with the novel. Its essence consists of phenomena that were long ago expelled from the territory of the novel, forces of unthinkable magnitude that create unbearably intimate connections over vast gaps in time and space. So, Emily, does the Deluge conjure up worlds that exceed finitude and distinctiveness so as to forge intimate connections over vast gaps?
Yes, at the same time as it points to the difficulty of that project. And I propose here that we read the AI as Markley insisting on the necessity of this kind of project while at the same time like conceding our reader skepticism of the possibility of that project. So the AI as both like a literal nascent technology in our world, but as like maybe an uncanny technology in the world of the novel, like mediates between the setting, the sense of place, and like of the characters and their intimate lives, right? And the discontinuity of climate change in the novel itself. But I think also the improbability, to go back to number one, of like all of these actors becoming entangled with one another throughout the time horizon, right, of the novel itself. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the novel's constantly folding back in on itself, temporality-wise, particularly in the end of it, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
Actually, Shane and Kate were connected all along and knew of or presumably thinking about one another all along. Right? So I think about one example of that. That one's harder because it is an American novel, right? It is a great American novel.
Right.
But there's something about like the pretension to great American novelhood that says, what if we didn't in a like, frontier thesis way, what if we tried to surpass the finitude that has been imposed?
Right. And I think this is something that like, whatever your view on American exceptionalism, like as fully mythical or as like cynically true or as kind of like optimistically true, it is a global political hurdle to like substantive, broad scale, long-term effective action on climate change, right? Yeah. So in that sense, it is like of the US, but it is the US in the novel, I think, is both the real US and discontinuous with the real US in some way.
I like the way of putting that. Yeah. Challenge number 5, which I'm going to basically skip over because we've already talked about it, and that's about humanism, and that the novel is a form that is fundamentally tied up with the onto epistemological project of humanism, and Cartesianism, and whether it's characters, nature is characters, et cetera, things we've discussed before. So let me go to a related challenge. So this is
we haven't talked about that at all.
I know. The separation of the science from the fiction. Right. And so like there's, Ghosh does this very interesting thing where he like reads, how Mary Shelley came to write Frankenstein as this kind of fundamental cleavage in fiction and science fiction. And so here's what he says is the quote question that remains Is it the case that science fiction is better equipped to address the Anthropocene than mainstream literary fiction? This might appear obvious to many. After all, there is now a new genre of science fiction called climate fiction or cli-fi. But cli-fi is made up mostly of disaster stories set in the future, and that to me is exactly the rub. The future is but one aspect of the Anthropocene. This era also includes the recent past and, most significantly, the present. Atwood lays out with marvelous clarity some of the ways in which the Anthropocene resists science fiction. It is precisely not an imagined other world apart from ours, nor is it located in another time or another dimension. So does Markley's The Deluge get over this division between science fiction, literary fiction, and do so in a way that engages with the Anthropocene in the present?
Okay, I'm going to give two answers to this question.
Please.
I think...
Several wolves.
I think he rejects the idea that you need to get over it, first of all. And second of all, like, also gets over it by way of situating it. I think there's a read on The Deluge that's not... Like, it says it ends in 2036 or whatever, but there's an alternate way to characterize the time of the deluge as a parallel present.
Yeah.
Which involves science, because we live in a world where science is both like a regime of knowledge production, of order, but is also the status of it, its authority is also being contested at the same time. So like, and there are characters who are questioning science and all of those aspects, right? There's like Tony and Ash most obviously, but Kate in her own way, Gail in her own way are also like trying to wonder about or interrogate the multiple regimes of science. So go with me here. This is not like a novel that relies on science to project into the future some hypothetical world we could be in if XYZ, whatever. But it is a parallel present where science is actually a character.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, it's because the book engages what could be a science fiction premise in the first chapter. Right? Like the methane clathrites, oh no, we're fucked and warming's going to happen way quicker than even like our more worst case scenarios of our present. So the parallel present both is and is not science fiction, I think is how the novel would like to have it. And I'm perfectly okay with letting it have both of those. Yeah.
Myself. But I think also a case for it not being fully embracing its like potential scientific, its potential character, like easy characterization as a science fiction novel. Evidence for that is that the disasters are not science fictional disasters. They are just like slightly elevated, ongoing disasters. They're like slightly increased versions of things that are also historical disasters at this point, right? Like, and I guess it's just like dramatic irony that like this book came out, right? Like reading it now also as opposed to when it came out, I think makes it even less of a future book and more of a present book, which is something I can't imagine that Markley did not anticipate, right?
That's a great question. Yeah. Because there's, so El Demonio,
the hurricane in Western North Carolina. I mean, that happened.
Yeah. And, we talked about this a little bit. I think my cultural object for El Demonio, one of them was the John Valiant book, Fire Weather, about the Fort McMurray fire which was 2016.
Right.
Which that's what I had to look up just now.
Yeah.
Okay. Ready for the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Individualism.
We answered yes to all of them so far.
Unsurprisingly, yes. Take of that, listener, what you will.
Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 7 is about individualism. And so what Ghosh is doing here is using John Updike as foil. And there's this famous review that Updike gives about like non-Western literature. And he talks about how like what the novel does is provide, quote, individual moral adventure, end quote, rather than question, quote, men in the aggregate. And he uses, even as Ghosh says, like the kind of generally accepted to be bad take by Updike here is kind of diagnostic of the relationship between individualism and the novel as a form. And so the way he frames this is he points out that like there are actually collectives all throughout novels all of the time. And so he says, quote, Updike was nevertheless in a certain sense right. It is a fact that the contemporary novel has become ever more radically centered on the individual psyche, while the collective, quote, men in the aggregate, end quote, has receded, both in the cultural and the fictional imagination. Where I differ from Updike is that I do not think that this turn in contemporary fiction has anything to do with the novel as a form. It is a matter of record that historically many novelists, from Tolstoy to Dickens to Steinbeck and Chinua Achebe, have written very effectively about men in the aggregate. In many parts of the world, they continue to do so even now. What Updike captures, then, is not by any means an essential element of the novel as a form. His characterization is true rather of a turn that fiction took at a certain time in the countries that were then leading the way to the great acceleration of the late 20th century. So after we talked about this for a half hour earlier in the episode, Emily Crandall does Markley push against the turn that associates the novel in the capitalist West, in capitalism or in capitalist America with individual moral adventure.
John, I'm going to take a surprising turn here and say yes.
No, it's a shock, a true shock, a surprise in number 6 or 7, whatever we're on at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's really... So when this came up in our discussion earlier, were you like laughing to yourself?
Very much so.
That's really funny. Yeah, I mean, and I think he does it in a whole bunch of different ways, even from the specific form of it that we were talking about with like what Matt and Kate's talking past each other in this conversation that maybe happened or maybe didn't happen, right? Like what that means for their different worldviews or their different like philosophies or like what they represent for possible different views. I think this also comes up in like the discussion of white supremacy in the novel, in the discussion of like the violence of the VR world, right? That there's like a diagnosis of men in the aggregate here that Markley is very much invested in.
Yes.
Rendering available for political analysis and critique, right?
Yeah. And I was jokingly talking about Kate as like a node in an assemblage earlier, but that's also kind of true of the novel as a whole, because there's this dynamic that Markley pulls off in which our 6 point of view characters plus Kate as the main character are actually all engaged in their own individual moral adventures.
Totally.
But the effect, and that they're all written in a different style by different authors, potentially within the world of the novel itself, or does do the individualizing gesture. But there's something about the necessity of putting them all together to tell the story of the Deluge that I think pushes against, like, okay, if this was just the years of rain and thunder, then Markley would fail.
Totally.
On this regard. But it's because you have the years of Reign of Thunder and Ash and Jackie and Kate and Keeper and Tony.
Okay. And another
and Shane,
piece,
crucially,
another
piece and the AI is also doing this too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Another piece of evidence, I think, textual evidence for this answer is, a piece of textual evidence in the novel itself and in our podcast.
My favorite kind of textual evidence
is that the novel is very self-consciously like a node in the assemblage of literature more broadly.
Yes.
And like that we came up with the fun structure of like putting it in conversation with other novels. So it is both in conversation and like of a collective in the novel itself, right? It evokes literal other authors and titles, but also gestures toward forms of writing, genres of writing, and I think is very in a way that betrays a kind of high regard for other writers and thinkers, right?
100%.
That it's in conversation, consciously or unconsciously, with Western philosophy as a project and the limits of that project.
We carried a serious Plato joke for many minutes about mimetic warfare earlier, which I think we both meant 100% serious.
100%. And maybe more than 100%.
And this is what Markley does in the novel. The performativity is so playful and yet so purposeful and serious.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that is good evidence for its attempt at straddling that expectation and the importance of the transcending of the novel as about the individual moral journey or whatever. What's the phrase?
Individual moral adventure.
Oh yeah, adventure.
Yeah. All right, next challenge. This one I think is going to be a little easier and quicker. Challenge, well, as an answer, not as a challenge. The challenge is logocentrism itself.
Okay.
Easy. So in section 18, Ghosh talks about the exclusion of quote unquote pictorial elements, unquote, from real serious novels. Mm-hmm. He refers to things like, quote, illuminated borders, portraits, coloring, line drawings, and so on, end quote. He then goes on to say, quote, so if it is the case that the last and perhaps most intransigent way the Anthropocene resists literary fiction lies ultimately in its resistance to language itself, then it would seem to follow that new hybrid forms will emerge and the act of reading itself will change once again as it has many times before. End quote.
Hilarious. Okay.
Really
I like the amount of times we talked about the texture of the headlines and the text boxes
and the drop shadows and how do you read it? And it wants you to think about how you read it. And
this
is different fonts and all of that.
Yeah.
So, yes,
definitely.
Wow. So that was all just from the first chapter of Great Derangement. I didn't even go into the politics one, but I will give you one of the things from politics and we'll end here. So this is about politics and the moral. Quote, this then is the paradox and the price of conceiving of fiction and politics in terms of individual moral adventures. It negates possibility itself. As for the non-human, it is almost by definition excluded from a politics that sanctifies subjectivity in which political claims are made in the first person, end quote. And again, I think there's that same kind of trick of, we have Ash and others, but most Ash more than anyone else is doing the individual politics, but he's in some ways always trying to reach for a not individualistic perspective. And I think that Ash is trying to conceptualize. Well, for Ash,
it's men in the aggregate, literally.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's
interesting.
That's my thought there. And then obviously our discussion of Kate and singularity very much bears on this question.
But I think also the political question of ethical concern is a self-conscious thing the novel is grappling with, which is a paradoxical question because we in part understand ethical principles to be at least individually, in some way, individually held or arrived at, even if we have an ethical commitment to a collective entity goal or so on, or even if they're formed in relations with others, they are held by individuals in some way, which is so there is a way in which the political question is, how do we convince individual people that their ethical concerns ought to extend far beyond where they currently draw the boundary? And so at the same time as you want to disavow individualism as the vehicle to achieve that worldview that's necessary, the individual is a kind of problem to that.
Yes. And this is what makes climate fiction such a fascinating genre. And this is a conversation we had a lot this semester with my students is, could you give X thing we read or watched to somebody to try to make them do that individualistic, voluntaristic act of whatever the level of concern or whatever is going to be. So,
and I think there's an interesting, like, when we have the, like, is it realistic knee-jerk reaction, there's like a abstract, like, individual that we imagine as impervious to the pull or something. Like, even if in our real lives we don't know that person at all, you know what I mean? And it's like one person always, right? Like, I was talking about this in Classics in Feminist Thought. I gave them the Feminism for the 99% manifesto. And we were going through each of the theses and doing this thought experiment where we were like, what parts of our daily lives are they diagnosing and critiquing? And then how would we imagine those, like, minutia in a day-to-day sense to change if we, like, go down the path that they set us
incredible
on.
Exercise.
So we're imagining the feminist strike, right? Like a global, like, women going on strike withdrawing, you know, like sex and emotional labor and so on. And they were like worried about violence and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, let's go, like, just go into your own homes. Like, they're like, well, you know, if we did a strike, like, our parents wouldn't take us seriously. I'm like, okay, let's imagine, like, you've all convinced all of your moms and all of your grandmas to, like, go on strike. Like, what happens in the house? And they were like, huh. And one of them was like, well, I think all the men in my family would probably die a lot earlier. And the other ones were like, you know, they wouldn't know how to get to work. They wouldn't know how to feed themselves. And I'm like, so this is the political thing that we're trying to, like, get at here. But they have this, like, imagined, like, man who's gonna, like, commit violence when faced with this phenomena of this strike that's, like, they're not picturing the people they really know. It's this, like, but it's always, like, one person, which is very fascinating to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or they generalize it as, like, a potential thing that could happen, but it's always, like, one man, like, killing his one wife or something. And, like, this is the risk. Or it's like one man who's like, who the fuck cares about climate change? And so, like, so thus we can do nothing because there's always going to be one man who says, like, who cares or something. This is not a very thought through, like, observation or phenomena.
To the conversation we were having about utopianism or realistic utopianism and the resistance to it.
But there's something about, like,
and then you pair that with, like, the individualizing of social ills and forms of violence that are socially organized.
And I think the novel's trying to grapple with that.
Also,
right, totally.
We should know.
Yeah.
See slow violence.
Yeah.
Okay. So my conspiracy theory after all of this is that I am utterly fascinated about whether or not Amitav Ghosh's The Great Derangement is consciously or not a part of what Markley was, like, thinking about in the many years.
When did The Great Derangement came out?
2016. Okay. So Markley had been working on the book already. But I'm, like, wondering, like, did he read it? Did he purposely try to avoid it? Did he read it and be like, I'm going to try to, like, set this as a challenge for myself? Like, I'm really, really fascinated to know if he has any relationship or even a intentional non-relationship to The Great Derangement.
Well, that's what we have to ask him.
Well, yes, exactly. So that's, I think, the first question, if we ever have the chance to talk to him. I'll also point out that the word deluge, you know, this shows that it's a good choice of a title for the deluge. I'm not, like, trying to draw a direct conspiracy connection. Yeah. But it appears several times when Ghosh talks about catastrophic flooding in Mumbai in 2005, in 2015, in Chennai in 2015. And I'm just like, oh yeah, now every time I see that word, guess where my brain goes. So my final question then for you, Emily, as part of this elongated game. So Ghosh names two novels in his mind, two Western novels, let's say, that have surmounted the challenge, that are, quote, set in a time that is recognizable as our own and both communicate with marvelous vividness the uncanniness and improbability, the magnitude and interconnectedness of the transformations that are now underway, end quote. And for him, it is Liz Jensen's Rapture and Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior.
Oh, I love that book.
That. Should we put Stephen Markley's The Deluge on that list?
Okay. Yes, but I wonder if Ghosh would.
That's, I think, I mean, I'm
not convinced that he would have read it as closely as we read it.
Well, we have, I think, determined without a doubt that other than Markley, his editor, his agent, we know this book better than anybody else.
But I think, what were the adjectives in that?
So I just did throw it in our shared doc. Marvelous vividness, uncanniness and improbability, magnitude and interconnectedness of transformations. I
mean, I feel like those are all words we would have used or words that are synonymous with words we've used to describe this novel. So it would be entirely like disingenuous of us to be like, I don't know if it passes as muster. But I think that for both of us,
and at the end,
right. I think for both of us, that was a first read impression, and those instincts like deepened as we read it more closely and put it in conversation with more things. So I think like, you could not in good conscience have like thought about the novel in the way that we have and not say that it works here.
Yeah, it'd be a good bit if we did, but
I know. Well, and I would actually be curious to know if Ghosh has read this novel.
Yeah, me too.
Because I think your question for Markley is like really interesting there, because if there's a way in which this novel is like self-consciously in conversation with Ghosh, and then Ghosh reading this novel is like self-consciously, like consciously.
This is our fanfic. We're not going to write fanfic of the characters in the Deluge. We're going to write fanfic about the like climate humanities debates that can exist about the book.
That tracks so hard.
It does. It really does.
But I've been selling this novel to people as exactly the way that Ghosh describes what a good climate novel does. Mm-hmm. And that this time, the time of the novel is increasingly more so daily recognizable as our own, is I think that maybe the best case for it as doing what Ghosh thinks a good climate novel should do.
I'm with you. All right. What did you think? What did you think of our game? And I told Emily, like, I don't think you need to prep for that at all. And now I feel like that was kind of mean. But a remarkable victory.
I don't know. Like, maybe I would have reread it, but I don't think that would have like made. I kind of like giving like knee-jerk.
Me too. That's what I thought would be useful.
Yeah. Because also, I think if I had had time to prepare, we probably would have come to the same conclusions.
As if we didn't anyway.
Well, right. But like, you know what I mean? I'm like, oh, here are the things I'm thinking off the top of my head. And you're like, oh, here are the ones that are very related, but slightly next to the that I thought about for a little longer. Yeah. I love that.
I thought that might work as a way to.
So good.
To move towards the close of our Deluge casting.
I don't know what to do now.
I think we've agreed that at some point in the future, we're going to do the more or less same thing for another novel. Yes?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. Do we want to say what that is now?
Do we want to do? Yeah.
Yeah, do the reveal, Emily.
Okay.
Unbox the future of this podcast.
But do we have a name for it yet?
No, not at all.
Okay, so the next iteration of We Are the Deluge is going to be us doing a similar thing, although we will, I'm sure, come up with an equally ridiculous concept for Kim Stanley Robinson's
Material is plenty,
yeah, Ministry for the Future. So stay tuned for some future
future casting.
Future casting, but in a parallel present.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Up next, though, I think we are going to do something we joked about as well, which is cast what if the Deluge becomes a prestige TV show on Warner, Netflix, Paramount, Skydance, the CW.
Yeah, great.
Future conglomerate to rule them all.
Yeah, I think that's going to be its own nice little episode there.
Yeah. And we're going to do we're going to read Spring Breakers as a climate film. I think it's also on the agenda.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for joining us.
Oh my God. So sad.
Last textual discussion of the brilliant climate change novel, The Deluge by Stephen Markley.
And we are The Deluge.